In this episode of In the Loop, while communities across the country protested the death of 29-year-old Tyree Nichols over the weekend, the city of Memphis moved to suspend even more emergency responders for their role in his death. We'll tell you more. Plus, what does it mean to buy someone's life rights? We explore how payouts from companies like Netflix have allowed them to tell someone's story in full, the good, the bad, and the nearly unbelievable. This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. We've got a lot going on here in the U.S., but in this episode, we're starting off with a country that's dealing with its own turmoil, Israel. Violence has erupted there recently, leading to the killings of Muslims and Jews. On Thursday, Israeli forces raided a militant stronghold in the West Bank, killing 10 people. In the following days, Palestinian gunmen have killed at least 9 people, targeting Jewish settlements in East Jerusalem. In the backdrop of this recent violence is a new hardline Israeli government whose critics are warning it could threaten the future of Israeli democracy. You might have seen some of the massive protests happening there. A new government has led to a lot of questions about the future of democracy and the rule of law in Israel. Former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu returned to power late last year while also facing an ongoing trial on corruption charges. But unlike previous coalitions, only right-wing nationalist and religious parties have formed this government, including one with a leader previously convicted of supporting a terror group. Even though this government doesn't have parties from all sides, Netanyahu's message to Israelis is that his government will look after all the citizens of Israel and that he's committed to doing what the people who voted for him want.
ממשלת ישראל ה-37.
The 37th government of Israel, which came into the world less than 1 week ago, is determined to go in the appropriate direction to establish our existence and our future as a Jewish and democratic state in the land of our fathers, in the land of Israel.
They're proposing changes to a wide array of things, like rules governing plastics, Israel's generous immigration policy for Jews, and an overhaul of Israel's court system that would allow the country's Knesset, or parliament, to overrule the country's Supreme Court with a simple majority vote. It's that last one that's getting people most riled up. In January, weekend protests have seen thousands hit the streets to oppose the court overhaul. An estimated 80,000 demonstrators braved heavy rain to protest in Tel Aviv earlier this month.
It was also quite remarkable because the rain was pouring down for parts of the time of the protest, but 80,000 people and their umbrellas came out.
That's Esther Solomon, editor-in-chief of the English section of the left-leaning Israeli newspaper Haaretz, who covered some of the protests. The next weekend, even more people showed up, with more than 100,000 turning out. University of Chicago law professor Tom Ginsburg, who studies constitutional democracies around the world, says any one of these changes on their own are reasonable, but enacting them all at once is worrying.
When you combine those two things, control over appointments and overruling after the judges make their decision, you see that the judiciary will be extremely weak after these reforms go through, without any leverage to discipline the Knesset, which means 61 members can do basically whatever they want.
Israel has long had a liberal democracy for its citizens, one that both Israel and its allies, including the U.S., have touted as a beacon of democracy in the Middle East. But that only applies to Israeli citizens, who are mostly Jewish, but include a minority of some Muslims living in Israel. Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza do not have Israeli citizenship and aren't a part of that democracy, even though Israel occupies the West Bank. Since its independence in 1948, Israel has been governed by a basic law system, sort of an informal constitution. The basic law says Israel is officially a Jewish and democratic state. That phrase has been fundamental to Israeli political debates. The Supreme Court has always been a very powerful institution in Israeli society, as it has interpreted and developed the constitutional rights of Israeli democracy in its rulings. But as Israel's right drifts further right and fights to weaken institutions like the judiciary, it's led to worries from folks like American University professor and Israel studies expert Boaz Etzili that the government is treating Israel more like the West Bank.
You just can't, control and suppress another nation for such a long time without being, with it having an effect on your own democracy, and how do you perceive the kind of like the balance between your own nationhood and democracy.
Netanyahu has campaigned with a tough on crime, tough on Palestinians message that appeals to the right-wing base. His former advisor and chief of staff, Aviv Bushinsky, told us he thinks it's natural for Netanyahu to turn hard right over trying to win broader support.
And Netanyahu, after maybe due to his experience or after what he experienced in person, decided to be right-wing all in. Not only he's not fetching, at least at the moment, to expand his coalition by center or center-left parties, but also he says that since it's a right-wing government, he or they should execute all their plans.
As Netanyahu tries to hold power and stave off his corruption charges, he's turned to some really far right-wing allies. Itamar Ben-gvir is the leader of the Jewish Power Party, which believes in Jewish supremacy. He's previously been convicted for supporting a Jewish supremacist terror group. As a member of the coalition, he's now the Minister of National Security. To give you a little background on what Ben-gvir is like, in 1995, after then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin signed a peace accord with the Palestinians, he taped an interview where he held a Cadillac hood ornament stolen from Rabin's car and seemed to threaten the Prime Minister.
This is the emblem, and people were able to remove it from the car. Just like we've gotten to the emblem, we can also get to Rabin.
Rabin was assassinated just weeks later by a Jewish supremacist opposed to peace with the Palestinians. More recently, Ben-gvir has been known to patrol Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, including an incident during last fall's election campaign where he pulled a gun and urged cops to shoot Palestinians who threw stones at him. Here, he shared a still from a clip shot by Israel's All World News, saying that he will go beyond what police are doing in order to protect Jewish people. He said in part, quote, "Jewish blood will not be wasted." But supporters and allies of Netanyahu aren't too fazed by Ben-gvir's history. They say that whether it's including far-right parties or pushing a court overhaul, it should go ahead because they won the election, and they promised these changes to voters.
I think that most people in Israel thought that, okay, Netanyahu says that they're going to do some changes, and he did say so prior to the elections. And not only him, also the current Speaker of the Parliament, Yariv Levin, the current Minister of Justice, etc., etc. They did say that they're going to change the system. And suddenly they are going to change the system, so everybody's shocked.
And complicating things here, Netanyahu has other issues he wants to work on. He's been aiming for some pragmatic foreign policy goals abroad. Netanyahu signed the Abraham Accords with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates in 2020, and he's aiming for more, including things where working with people who don't share his politics will be helpful. Former State Department senior advisor David Makovsky worked on Israel policy during Netanyahu's previous tenure, and he told us more.
His agenda is a much more Middle East focused agenda. Believes that there could be a diplomatic breakthrough with Saudi Arabia. He believes that the U.S. is after the Iran nuclear deal now and is a new phase. His agenda requires working closely with the White House. And they will look certainly askance at some of the ideas of his junior coalition partners.
But there's still an outcry, not just within Israel, but in the U.S. too. American officials, including Secretary of State Tony Blinken, have suggested that they will work with Netanyahu, but not with Ben-gvir. And Democratic Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada, co-leader of a bipartisan congressional delegation that visited Israel in January, said she did not want the delegation to meet Ben-gvir or Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, the leader of a religious party who describes himself as proudly homophobic. Okay, let's bring in somebody who can help us understand all of this from both an Israeli and American perspective. Joining us now is Ambassador Martin Indyk. He is a two-time former U.S. ambassador to Israel and was President Barack Obama's special envoy for Middle East peace. He's now a distinguished fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. In the segment leading into our conversation here, we talked about some of the questions around Israeli democracy and the rule of law. How have some of the recent protests and other issues brought on by the new Israeli government altered the U.S. relationship with Israel, and how might it continue to change going forward?
Israel has a kind of special place in the American psyche and in American politics that's quite different to most other countries. It's seen as an ally, as a country that shares our values as well as our interests in stabilizing an unstable part of the world. The fact that Israel is a Jewish and democratic state is the reason why the United States has such strong, broad, popular support for the country.
Israeli leadership and its voting public have trended rightward over time, but American Jews have been and are staying pretty politically liberal and left-leaning. What consequences might that have for both Israel's reliance on support from American Jews and for American policymakers' interest in supporting Israel?
And I think it's important to understand that it's also a generational question for the American Jewish community. You're absolutely right to describe the majority of Jews as liberals and progressives and strong supporters of the Democratic Party. The connection with Israel is stronger amongst the older generation than the younger generation. And there's a lot of reasons, but I think the younger generation is challenged by Israel, by some of its policies, as you say, by its rightward trend over the years, and in particular by its occupation of the West Bank and ruling over some 2.5 million Palestinians. And the older generation has a tendency, my generation has a tendency to forgive Israel, to understand Israel.
How has the relationship varied depending on who is in charge on either side? And to go a bit further, how different might things look if Republicans win back the White House and are able to work with this edition of Netanyahu's government?
Well, traditionally, it's the Democrats who have been the strongest supporters of Israel. And in the past, the Republicans have been less supportive. But that all changed in the last decade with the evangelicals moving in to become the really solid base of the Republican Party. And they want to love Israel to death, as it were, in the sense that eventually, according to their view, of course, God gave all of the land of Israel to the Jews. So they're very supportive of Israel for that reason. But on the other hand, when the time comes, when the Messiah comes, all the Jews are going to have to convert to Christianity. So that'll be the end of the Jewish states. So you've seen the Republican Party shift to a very strong support for Israel. And Netanyahu in particular presents to American audiences as a very Republican leader. And Republicans tend to love him. He speaks their language in political terms.
Ambassador Martin Indyk is a two-time former U.S. ambassador to Israel, a former special envoy for Middle East peace, and now a distinguished fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we've got a lot more coming your way this hour, but up next, we're looking at a few entertainment stories we've been keeping tabs on, like why are known scammers getting deals for TV shows? We'll run down what's happening after a quick break.